Hello, I'm Patrick Daly and I'm one of the team at the Rural Doctors Association of Australia. Each year, RDAA and the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine offer excellence awards that recognise some outstanding rural generalist doctors and some inspiring future doctors as well. I've been lucky enough to spend time chatting with 4 of our awards recipients for this podcast series. Today's podcast features Indira or Indi Barrow, the RDAA Medical Student of the Year for 2021. Originally from Sydney, Indi is in her 3rd year of postgraduate medicine at the University of Melbourne. Last year, she completed her first clinical year at Shepparton in regional Victoria, which sparked her passion for rural health. And when I spoke with her, she was undertaking a GP rotation in the remote Victorian coastline community of Malakuta. Outside her medical studies, Indi also undertakes some disability support work, and this has seen her working with one of the Australian athletes who competed at the recent Paralympic Games in Tokyo. Before I begin talking with Indi, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we meet on across Australia as we listen to this podcast. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander listeners who may be joining us. Indi, thanks very much for joining us today and congratulations on being selected as RDAA's Medical Student of the Year for 2021. What was your reaction when you found out?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. It's been really good news, and I'm very grateful to have received the RDAA award. What was my reaction? I was on an aged care ward doing my geriatrics rotation, and I had an N95 mask on and a face shield. And to be frank, it was a bit of a dank indoors environment, and I got this call, and I was stoked. It was a great surprise in the day. Yeah.
Bit hard to yell out a surprised reaction with a mask on, though, I'd imagine.
Yeah, any scream would definitely have been muffled in those N95s. They're definitely fitted so that there's no air coming in or out. It's only through that filter at the front. So, I kind of saved the news for when I got home and told my friends and family. And yeah, it was good news all around.
Now, tell me a little bit about your childhood. Did you grow up in a rural town? Did you have some early rural experiences?
So I have to admit, I was a city slicker for most of my life, which I have some friends that like to tease me about that. Oh. And I grew up in Sydney and I've been living in Melbourne for the last 8 years while I do my study, or 7 years, I think. I think the rural life in terms of the community aspect and also just the adventure aspect kind of infiltrated through my family. So I grew up with 3 brothers and, family holidays of climbing trees. And my dad in particular, he's a very outdoors man. So he's kind of retrained at the moment to do outdoor guiding on the Malakuta trail and he's headed to Tassie now. So I think that kind of outdoors nature came from early childhood, but I kind of was in the wrong place to live out my outdoorsy dreams. So yeah, I didn't grow up rurally, but I'm looking forward to lots of rural experiences in the future.
So when did it click to you that you wanted to study medicine and also that you thought a career in rural medicine might be a good idea?
Yeah, great question. Medicine was something that became a natural fit because I was kind of a science and maths nerd for a lot of my childhood. And slowly that morphed into liking chemistry and then pharmacology. And then it kind of became obvious that medicine was something it would suit me and I would suit it. And I haven't really looked back since starting it. Yeah, so I actually spent a bit of time before I started medicine doing a stint in sales. And that was a job that I realized quickly I really wasn't suited to. I wasn't good at it is a bit of psychological manipulation in sales, and I just wasn't good at that. And I did that job whilst I was waiting to hear from my med offer, and I realized that I needed to do something completely different from sales, and medicine really filled all of my wants in that way. And the other thing, when I did that sales job, we had to do a personality test. I had the highest scores were attention to detail and social ability. And I think that's what medicine's all about. You've got to be really on your game in terms of knowing the medicine, but you also need to interact and get along with a broad spectrum of people. So that's what I'm loving about medicine now. In terms of the rural component, I got into the rural clinical school when I accepted my med offer. And that meant I had to go away for my second year to a regional location. And I loved my regional experience in Shepparton. That was last year. It became almost like a life pivoting moment and like an open door to realizing that there's more to medicine than just learning it in a textbook or in a metro hospital.
Do you think you would have had the same interest in rural medicine had you not had access to that clinical placement in a rural or regional area?
I don't think so. I'd like to think that I would have come around to rural in the end. I do remember I had a really interesting talk by a GP who came off the plane from Sierra Leone and talked about helping out in the Ebola crisis. And I was like, well, that is, I know it's not rural and remote medicine, that's like MSF kind of stuff, but that I always will remember that talk, and I was like, that is a really cool experience using the medical skills in low resource settings. So that definitely influenced my decision, but I think that the year away last year actually exposed me to a new lifestyle and a new way of medicine. And I actually think that a lot of students would benefit from an experience like that, a whole year or a lengthy amount of time to really put roots in somewhere rural, to really get the benefits. Yeah.
Was it hard to get that clinical placement for a whole year, or was it offered up as a fairly easily accessible alternative to you?
I didn't have a choice when I did that. It was, I could choose between where I was going in terms of out of 4 regional places in Victoria. If I didn't want to go to Shepparton or rural in my second year, I wouldn't have been able to get into med. So my hand was forced, and I'm glad in that way. I think it's one of those experiences where you don't know what you've got until you try it, or what there is out there until you try it.
So tell me a little bit about that placement. What were some of the highlights and what were some of the challenges that you weren't expecting, but also some of the supports that you came across?
Yeah, so I'll start with the challenges. Obviously, moving and living in a new place with new people can be hard. There is always that transition time from being uprooted from your previous life. But I think the rural community that I met there was so supportive and I have seen that time and time again with other rural placements, including the one in Malakuta that I'm on now. You can uproot your life, but you'll be welcomed with a warm hug by all of the beautiful people that live in that community. Everyone wants to know the new kid in town, and soon you'll get invited to dinners, and I'm going on a canoe trip with someone on Sunday, and everyone just wants to incorporate you into their village if you show keen interest to be part of the community. And I think being a medical student puts you in a really advantageous position for that, because you're already a valued member of the community and you already have a way of meeting a lot of the community members. So a challenge was, starting a new place, but it was easily adapted. One of the other challenges, I think this might be specific to when I was in Shepparton and the setup there, but we were across the road from the hospital in the student housing. And so that was great for one reason, where you could go in whenever the ED registrar would say, hey, I'm putting in a pigtail into someone's ascites abdomen, come over now. And you'd be like, yep, like you're there. A challenge of that though was, you'd be in your room and you could hear them call out code greys or code blues from your room. So you could never quite switch off in that regard. But that was a specific scenario.
And what about the supports you had available there, and also the access to seeing some of those procedures you might not get access to in a major city hospital?
Yeah, so I'll start with supports. The support that I had in Shepparton was amazing. It was my first clinical year. First year was with the books, second year last year was in the hospitals, and I could not have been more supported into approaching that environment in terms of how to slot in with the other doctors, how to approach patients. There was really friendly nurses who it was their job to facilitate that. The medical school was also really hands-on with us, because when you're there, when you're on site and everyone else is on site, the accessibility to supports and people's investment in you is more massive. And I've noticed that difference with city med student life versus rural med student life, where the supports could not be more different. And I think that has been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, with people being less seen, less accessible behind their screen, but the supports are there rurally. The other question was about going to procedures, was it?
Yeah, access to procedures. I mean, we hear that students undertaking city placements are often at the back of a group of students, whereas in a rural or regional setting, the access to be able to see procedures firsthand is much greater.
Yeah, so when I was in, I know all these examples are about Shepparton, but it really does extend to when I also went to Nhulunbuy end of the year. So this example I'll give in Shepparton. So in the ED department, when we were a student rotating through there, we got the handover from the paramedics, took the initial assessment of the patient, did a history and exam, took the bloods, and then presented to the intern or registrar. And that was amazing. Like, you felt like you were actually doing something, contributing. I have had more experiences of standing back and feeling less accessibility to help and be included in a city environment. I know this experience is, not I don't speak for everyone, but it has certainly been harder to get involved in a metro setting. Whereas when you are rural, people know you, and if people know you, they're going to invite you to do all sorts of opportunities.
You also got involved in the local headspace organisation in Shepparton. How did you become involved in that, and how beneficial was that in terms of your experience in going forward as a medical student and a doctor?
It was one of those small community network situations where one of the doctors sent out an email to us students and said, there's an opportunity to volunteer at Headspace. And those opportunities, again, only come with everyone knowing everyone and there being a small, tight-knit community. And so I applied to volunteer as a youth voice at Headspace. And it was great to work with them. A little bit of it was in person, mostly online, about understanding that service and what impact it has on the community. The main takeaways I got from that was understanding what mental health services there are for young people across Australia, because Headspace is a national program. And I really value that experience for understanding the community services that there are available. As a doctor, you will constantly be referring to communities or services like Headspace. And I think having that ground level understanding of how it really jigsaws into society and the community is important.
You mentioned Nhulunbuy a moment ago, and that seemed to be a particularly moving experience for you. Tell me a little bit about that and why it was such a great experience.
Yeah, so I went to Nhulunbuy for 5 weeks last December with a good mate of mine. And again, I think it was one of those life pivoting moments where you really understand what kind of differences there are across Australia in terms of health and social standards. And so it was a really small community, and with the hospital there, and my friend and I and another student, we got experience going through ED, the ward, and the GP clinics there, servicing the local Yolngu people as well as the fly in, fly out workers. And before that, I hadn't had a remote experience, nor had I had First Nations health experience. So at medical school, we do have a focus on First Nations health, but I think seeing it and seeing the differences firsthand makes a huge difference.
Was the gap quite surprising to you when you first moved there for the placement?
Yeah, the gap was really surprising. It's hard to sum up into words because the Yolngu culture was so rich and culturally preserved, which was great to see. And then on the other hand, because you were seeing such a preserved culture with also contrasted to like more mainstream Australian hospitals and services. The contrast was massive in terms of culture and also health outcomes. And it was actually, it felt strange being there because I didn't know whether a mainstream Australian like myself going over there was helping the health outcomes, or whether it was in fact more outside influence on a society and culture that should have been untouched anyway. And I don't want to get too political here, but yeah, it was a really great experience, and something that I wish every medical student could experience.
It sounds like the top end must have got into your heart when you're up there, because you're looking at undertaking your intern years at Darwin or Alice Springs hospitals. What is it about Northern Australia that made an impact on you?
Yeah, so as soon as I came back from Nhulunbuy, I was calling up, people all over the top end. I called Thursday Island. I called like other areas of Northern Queensland, being like, do you take medical students? Because I didn't want to return from that experience and forget the lessons that I learned there in terms of the reality of different health outcomes, and also just that there are other parts of Australia that feel like a different country to, for example, the East Coast. I managed to tee up a placement in Derby, which is in a remote part of Western Australia, for the summer, but unfortunately COVID has impacted those plans. And so it's a bit of a wait and see in terms of the borders opening. Otherwise, there's a few other talks and works in action about getting somewhere else. But, we'll have to wait and see what borders do with that. But nonetheless, I will be applying for my internship in either Darwin or Alice Springs. I'm yet to tease out which one, just because I feel like, as I said, I don't want to turn my back on the whole lesson and learning experience that I've had with my rural and remote health times and placements. And I think there's more to learn. There's more to learn to bring back and change how we do health currently for remote communities.
Can you see that as a long-term career option, working in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health?
Yeah, so I think, Patrick, you were asking about my 10-year plan in the email, and I think 10 years is a bit hard to say what will happen in 10 years, but for the short term, I do see myself being in the Northern Territory at least for a few years whilst I am being a junior doctor, and then I guess seeing where the wind takes me. Who knows what opportunities could come up, but I'm definitely, my heart is with rural and remote health, and we'll have to see along the way. Yeah.
So speaking about remote parts of Australia, you're currently in a remote fishing village on the Victorian coast, a place called Malakuta, where you're undertaking your GP rotation. Why did you select Malakuta, and what have been your experiences there? When
I was in Shepparton, joined the rowing club, and I did a few regattas for the rowing club this year before lockdown, and I got chatting to one of the members of the rowing community, and she said, I know someone who is the only doctor for miles in Mallacoota. And my ears pricked up, and I was like, can I ask you about that? Can I get that contact? Because this is, straight off the plane as well from the Northern Territory. And I knew I had this GP rotation coming up, and I wanted to use it in a way that would enhance kind of those rural generalism skills. And so it kind of was a networking way, and I finally got here just a few days ago. Even though we're on the East Coast and it's nowhere near like Nhulunbuy, it really makes you put your clinical reasoning hat on and gets you to think about the principles of medicine, which is what I wanted. And everyone here has been super lovely, and the doctor here, there's a few doctors now. She's like the heart of the community, and she's really involved in so many different things, and it's reinforced for me how good it is to be a rural doctor in terms of just knowing your community, having that rewarding experience by having almost your friends come in and seeing them benefit from your services. Yeah.
So what sorts of things are you expecting to see while you're on placement in Malakuta?
Yeah, I think I'll be seeing a lot of long-term management of chronic diseases, and a few fingers and toes from people bashing things. I'll have to let you know, Patrick. I'm sure I'll have some better examples by the end of the 6 weeks here.
Be some adventures coming up, no doubt.
Yeah.
Now, you've been working part-time as a disability support worker while you've been undertaking your medical studies as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that, how you ended up in that field, and how you think it'll shape you as a doctor?
Yeah. I've been working casually as a disability support worker for a number of years. I got onto that because my brother uses those services. He has been diagnosed with autism and ADHD from a young age, and I guess having the family knowledge of what supports like that can do pushed me to also do it. So at the start, I was working with a lot of young kids with intellectual disabilities and learning disabilities, and got a few good stories, because now I've been doing running with a vision impaired Paralympian.
Oh, wow.
Which is a pretty cool gig to get out of disability support work. So she just went over to Tokyo and did that. And
you weren't the guide runner with her?
No, I wasn't, because she was doing a different sport than running. But yeah, I've been doing a bit of guide running with it as well. And I really enjoy the work doing that. And as towards how it will shape me as a doctor, again, knowing those community supports with the NDIS and the integration, kind of seeing how it operates on a ground level. And if let's say you're going to be a pediatrician, actually knowing what it is like for a family which has a child with a disability, I think that gives you a lot of empathy in terms of understanding how challenging it can really be.
Speaking of paediatrics, is that an area you're particularly interested in, or have there been other areas during some of your placements that you've gone, wow, that's a fantastic area of medicine I really hadn't thought I'd be interested in, but I'm increasingly becoming so?
Yeah, another great question. So when I've come back from my rural and remote experiences, I've always been very set on needing to pursue rural GP. And then I've come back and loved women's health and loved psychiatry and also pediatrics. And moving through those rotations, I was like, oh, maybe I would need to do this. But if I want to do all of those, it just points me back again towards generalism or general practice. So yeah, I do like a broad range of things, but women's health and psychiatry in particular.
We touched on this a little bit earlier, but in more general terms, as a medical student, what additional measures do you think are really needed to encourage the next generation of doctors to consider rural careers, and what sort of supports are required that aren't currently there?
I think now institutions such as universities and like Rural Doctors Association of Australia, they can definitely wrangle the pandemic as a reason to go rural, because obviously the cities have been more hard hit, and I think people realize that they're getting more learning experiences going rural. And so I think that's a really good, if there's going to be any benefits from a pandemic, that's probably one. The other thing is, as I said, kind of just throw them in the deep end and see if they like it. I think I was the same. I didn't know that I wanted to do it until I tried it. And people kind of have their blinkers on. They think they know what they want to do. But if you just show them gently or, put them in the country for a year, people will eventually realize the good life.
Do you think the message is getting out there about rural practice and the benefits of rural medicine, or is there more to be done in reaching the younger cohort in terms of marketing rural practice more?
It's tricky, because I do think that hearing testimonials from people is often the best way to change people's behaviour. So I think that, yes, there could be more marketing done, and I know that the rural placements with the pandemic have been particularly hindered because of the pandemic. And I know that there are a lot of opportunities and promotions for rural placements in the past, and it's more difficult now. But I think that changing people's behaviour and attitude towards undertaking more rural medicine, I think it will have to come from experience and getting them to experience it.
Now, outside your medical studies, you have a swathe of other interests that I'd imagine keep you fairly busy, including rowing. Tell me about a few of those interests and how they might fit into a rural sort of lifestyle as a future rural doctor.
Yeah. So when I was in Shepparton last year, I finally got back into rowing after like a few years hiatus. There was a cute little rowing club that I joined, and it was, I don't know if you've done rowing, Patrick, but it's a very hectic culture, and a lot of people are spooked by the competitiveness and the seriousness of it, and also the cost. But this rowing club in Shepparton was relaxed, affordable, nice. It was pleasant. And then alongside that, I got back into swimming, which I hadn't done in years. And there's a lot of, if you're out in the rural community, there's a lot of outdoors and bush and other people who like doing things like that. So your weekend activities become canoeing down the river next to Malakuta rather than going to the pub all day every day. And so I like to do those things. I also do some skiing when it's not locked down, and I do some community radio, which I started this year, doing my own show around women's health, which I've done out of a community radio station in Melbourne. And then that's something I've been able to carry through to Malakuta, because I have a community radio here, which I just found out before this interview. They set it up because of emergency broadcasting because I've had fires through here a few times. So cool project there. Yeah,
so you'll be able to get involved in the radio station there while you're on placement?
Yeah, I was just doing it before this.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, just came from the studio.
And you're also a very keen cook, as I understand it.
So I've learnt how to make bread that's not requiring sourdough starter. And yeah, so I do enjoy cooking and bread making and dessert making. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned your support work with the vision impaired athlete before, and a lot of people, having just seen the Paralympics, would be fascinated to know, as a guide runner, how that all works. Can you describe what's involved there?
Yeah, so different people have different levels of vision impairment. So I haven't guided someone that was completely blind. So one person I run has just lost peripheral vision and long distance vision, and then it varies between clients. You can have what's called a tether, which is like a little piece of rope that you both hold. So that's actually a cue for other runners that you're a guide and they're a blind runner. And people, always ding their bike bells and say hello and run wide, give you a wide berth. But you have to call out all of the road and gravel changes. So you give them a bit of a heads up about whether the upcoming track is flat or bumpy. And if there's a undulating part, you can say high feet, and they pick up their feet so they're not kind of about to trip. And then, just calling the terrain ahead. Yeah. And if bikes are coming fast, you just kind of let them know where the bikes are, because it's quite scary when bikes are coming fast around you.
And what about when there's a drop in the ground? How do you get across that message?
So I would just explain there's a ditch or there's a drop or a step.
And how far ahead are you having to describe that? A couple of meters ahead of that happening, or?
Yeah, it depends on the person's preference. So some people don't like to be narrated the whole run. Some people just like a call a few seconds before. Yeah, so I tend to say if it's flat for a bit or if there's bumps coming up, and then maybe a second or 2 seconds before I call the change or the step or so they're expecting it.
And in terms of running with a Paralympian, there would be some pressure there, I'd imagine, as the guide runner, to actually be able to keep up with the Paralympian.
I was a bit nervous about that. I I thought she would outrun me for sure. We actually kept good pace together, which was thankful. I thought I'd be totally wiped clean.
Maybe at the Paralympics it might have been a different story, but
Yeah.
at least in training.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, you didn't get to go to the Paralympics this time, but in the future, would that be something that you'd be interested in attending?
Yeah, they're actually bringing the Paralympics to, Australia, when Brisbane in 2032. The goalball is the sport of the person I was running. And I know a couple of people who do goalball. They're really excited about getting that event to be in Australia. Yeah.
I think the coverage of the Paralympics this time round was a lot better. Do you get the sense from having been involved in that community that there was a greater focus on it this time round, and it was a really positive thing for the Paralympic movement?
It's hard to say from my perspective whether I thought there was more visibility or not, because that's very subjective. But the clients that I was speaking to who are vision impaired, they were actually saying because of the pandemic, it has helped the visibility. Yeah, because the people wanted something to watch at home, and I think it did give a bit more of a platform.
And you would have been watching it with some interest, having had a client who was over there competing.
Yeah, that's right. And there was goalball was on for most of the nights. It got good coverage, and I learned all about from my clients the big dogs in the sport. So China, Great Britain. I don't think I can say Russia. I don't know what the political word is for them anymore.
But you had the inside goss.
I did. Yeah, and they're looking forward to the 2032 Olympics in Brisbane because they'll be going to that. Yeah.
Indi, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you very much for making the time to talk to us today.
No problem. Thank you again for the award. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I've been enjoying chatting.
And that was Indi Barrow, the RDAA Medical Student of the Year for 2021. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and I look forward to having you tune in again. Until next time, happy days.